I think this is a critical moment in our shared history. And I say that because we're facing a transportation crisis. Because it's pretty clear that the transportation systems that we developed in the last century are at a breaking point. And let me give you some context to that. During the next 60 seconds, as we all kind of sit around here, motorists across the country will spend more than a combined 15,000 hours in traffic. Now that's just in 60 seconds. And it's costing Americans approximately $149,000 every minute in wasted fuel, and that's not including all the productivity loss that occurs because people are sitting in traffic. Today we're announcing that Ford is teaming up with cities around the world, and we couldn't be more proud to be starting here in San Francisco to chart the new path in the new century. So during the next 8 years, Ford is going to be investing in a number of transportation initiatives, all of which are aimed at improving mobility here in the Bay Area. And the first part of this plan is the creation of a shuttle service that could supplement and expand the reach of traditional mass transit. And we're announcing this morning that we're acquiring Chariot, a crowdsourced shuttle service based right here in San Francisco. The Chariot shuttles complement mass transit with fast, reliable, and comfortable service. So in addition to the new dynamic shuttle service, some great, obviously two-wheeled transportation solutions. So today we're announcing obviously that we're partnering with Motivate and their CEO, Jay Walder, and to expand bike sharing here in the Bay Area with the new Ford GoBike. And as the mayor mentioned, we have plans to add an additional 7,000 bikes in the Bay Area by 2018, all of which will be accessible through our Ford Pass platform. And what we'll do is we'll use the traffic data that we collect from the bikes to build an interconnected mobility platform and a network. And what we'll do, it will provide real-time data that helps plan your commute based on weather conditions, usage patterns, and of course, bike availability. Today also marks at our company the kickoff of a new team we're creating inside the company called City Solutions. And the team's role and their remit is to work with cities around the world to conceptualize and then implement new ways of getting locals as well as visitors around town and getting them to where they want to go and doing it easily. Whether that's through dynamic shuttles, or whether that's through autonomous vehicles, or ride-hailing services, or bike sharing, it's all of the above. I think this is a critical moment in our shared history. And I say that because we're facing a transportation crisis. Because it's pretty clear that the transportation systems that we developed in the last century are at a breaking point. And let me give you some context to that. During the next 60 seconds, as we all kind of sit around here, motorists across the country will spend more than a combined 15,000 hours in traffic. Now that's just in 60 seconds. And it's costing Americans approximately $149,000 every minute in wasted fuel, and that's not including all the productivity loss that occurs because people are sitting in traffic. Today we're announcing that Ford is teaming up with cities around the world, and we couldn't be more proud to be starting here in San Francisco to chart the new path in the new century. So during the next 8 years, Ford is going to be investing in a number of transportation initiatives, all of which are aimed at improving mobility here in the Bay Area. And the first part of this plan is the creation of a shuttle service that could supplement and expand the reach of traditional mass transit. And we're announcing this morning that we're acquiring Chariot, a crowdsourced shuttle service based right here in San Francisco. The Chariot shuttles complement mass transit with fast, reliable, and comfortable service. So in addition to the new dynamic shuttle service, some great, obviously two-wheeled transportation solutions. So today we're announcing obviously that we're partnering with Motivate and their CEO, Jay Walder, and to expand bike sharing here in the Bay Area with the new Ford GoBike. And as the mayor mentioned, we have plans to add an additional 7,000 bikes in the Bay Area by 2018, all of which will be accessible through our Ford Pass platform. And what we'll do is we'll use the traffic data that we collect from the bikes to build an interconnected mobility platform and a network. And what we'll do, it will provide real-time data that helps plan your commute based on weather conditions, usage patterns, and of course, bike availability. Today also marks at our company the kickoff of a new team we're creating inside the company called City Solutions. And the team's role and their remit is to work with cities around the world to conceptualize and then implement new ways of getting locals as well as visitors around town and getting them to where they want to go and doing it easily. Whether that's through dynamic shuttles or whether that's through autonomous vehicles or ride-hailing services or bike sharing, it's all of the above.
Ideas are coming forth, and the nice part about Ford is that we formed this relationship some time ago when we were trying to get a smart city challenge grant to the feds. We're looking at one of those solutions that we articulated when we put together what smart cities in the future and today ought to be all about. This is one of those really real-life answers to people's mobility, real-life challenges that we're creating solutions on. We're no longer just talking about the challenge. We're going to offer solutions, and this is what we get to do today. I'm very proud of this partnership with Ford, with the mobility sector, with their innovation team, but also working in conjunction with our MTA, our MTC, our regional partners.
My name is Doug Newcomb. I'm a president and founder of the C3 Group, also a journalist. I've been covering this space, car technology, for a long, long time. And I have to say, this is such an exciting time. And as Mark mentioned, you kind of wonder, what is an automaker like Ford? You expect to see cars up here. But I think we're in such an important time here. We're seeing all these things come together. Automobiles, of course, public transportation, and we have a great panel here. I'll let them really quickly introduce themselves, and we'll be doing a little bit more deeper dive into what Mark and some of the mayors talked about today. So please.
Thank you, Doug. I'm Jim Hackett, and I'm the executive chairman of Ford Smart Mobility LLC, and we'll talk about what it does a little later.
Hi, I'm Ali Vahadzadeh. I'm a co-founder and CEO of Chariot, and very excited to be on the stage and sharing this panel.
And Jay Walder, I'm the CEO of Motivate, and just thrilled.
Great. Well, let's go ahead and get started. Now, part of today's announcement is Ford's collaboration with Motivate in the Bay Area. Jay, you have a long history of working with cities to address mobility challenges. Now, as we start to think about urban mobility, what role do you see bikes playing as part of the transportation system?
Sure. You know, I come to it perhaps from a little bit different perspective than Ford does. My history is actually running large transit systems. I had the good fortune to run the transit systems in New York, in Hong Kong, and in London. And those are incredibly powerful machines for development and the way that the cities work. A couple of years ago, when I started to tell people that I was going to leave that and go to run a bike sharing company, people looked at me, in fact, they said it to me, are you crazy? But you know, I have to tell you that I've never been happier going to work than I am today. And one of the things that's actually happening in our cities and the way that I think about this is we are actually seeing a revolution in the way that we get around cities. It's not the way it was 20 years ago or even 10 years ago.
Right.
Bike sharing, what we're talking about today, Motivate is a company that operates 30,000 bicycles in 12 cities across the world. 5 years ago, we were operating 400 bicycles. That's the difference in the growth that is taking place. If I were to think about a city and said, if I stood on the stage 5 years ago and said, you could find a city in the United States where there will be 10 million bike share trips in a year, 10 million, you would have all looked at me like I was crazy. We had 10 million bike share trips in New York last year.
You know,
It blows me away in terms of how quickly it's happening and the way in which it is becoming part of the fabric of cities.
well, there's obviously a lot of moving parts, no pun intended, to transportation in cities. So I wanted to speak about, obviously Motivate works closely with the Metropolitan Transportation Commission. I assume relationships like that are key to success. What are some of the key enablers for cities to have a robust bike sharing program as part of a larger transportation system?
Well, look, I think it's three parts. The MTC is fantastic because they provide a real regional framework for what's going on. Their vision wasn't about making small incremental change. Their vision is about making things that really, really make a difference in what's going on in the region, and they don't see it as being good enough to just hit part of what's going on. They wanted a regional approach to what was happening. That's a hugely important part in doing it. A second part is at the city level. The idea of the way cities are transforming their physical space, the infrastructure that's being built. I mean, San Francisco has built more than 400 miles of bike lanes in the last 10 years. Does it matter? It matters enormously. The mode share or the doubling of bicycle use in San Francisco over the last decade. That's amazing in doing it. And then third, I would say within cities, we have to recognize the grassroots level as well. The advocacy groups, the San Francisco Bike Coalition, East Bay Bike, Silicon Valley Bike Coalition. These groups in this area have been absolutely fundamental to establishing the framework of allowing things like this to happen. And then the ability to stand here today, and I said it before and I can't say it enough, we can stand here and do this because these groups have been doing all this work collectively for the last decade.
Like I said, a lot of moving parts. Now, Jim, Mark mentioned how unusual it is to have an automaker talking about these mobility solutions. I mean, I've been to lots of Ford events. Usually there's a vehicle somewhere in sight. So why is Ford getting involved in shared transportation, and especially bikes?
Well, I have to say that I was very proud of Mark's comments this morning because they captured something that's really important, which is if you can stand at an altitude where you just see the city, as one system, if you can stand back and think about that and you see our vehicles moving in that system, what Ford sees in addition to the vehicles is it sees the people. And the people that are in those vehicles have a life that transcends aspects of being in the vehicle and being outside of it. We call that multimodal. And as a consequence, our interest is in the day of the life of that traveler. What are the pain points that they face, and how can we help improve their life as they travel? How can we make the modes of transportation, as we stare at it at high altitude, be one system? This is the reasons that we've started to see that the city really is our partner in this effort. And we created this group called City Solutions here in San Francisco as our first effort at that. And what I'm most excited about, as Mark hinted, is that there's data coming from all aspects of these kind of nodes on the network. The bikes are going to be transmitting to the cloud. The dynamic shuttle is going to be communicating. And we're going to have a way that these two systems help the user now have a better day.
I'm glad you mentioned that because one of the other announcement here today is Ford's acquisition of Chariot. And I really liked what we're talking about today, how it's going to serve underserved communities. I forget what the name he mentioned. But I wanted to ask Ali, how will shuttles fit into this picture, the future of urban mobility?
Sure, and it's a number of ways, and I'm glad you mentioned underserved areas because one of the things that Chariot is doing is it's certainly complementing the public mass transit system by providing additional capacity to underserved areas and actually underserved times of days like the commute when demand for mass transit services is highest. I'll give you an example. One day we walked into the office on a Monday and we saw there were several hundred votes to crowdsource a certain route between downtown San Francisco and the Fisherman's Wharf district, where there's a lot of hospitality businesses like Alcatraz Cruises, Pier 39, a number of hotels, Ghirardelli Square. Those companies actually employ a ton of hourly workers, hospitality workers, who are coming from the East Bay using BART. And what we found was all of these voters for this commute between downtown San Francisco and the tourist district were actually the employers coming in and encouraging their employees to crowdsource a route, a Chariot route. And overnight we had several hundred customers coming in from the East Bay using BART as their main trunk line and using Chariot as a last mile commute between downtown and their hospitality jobs in the morning and getting back to BART to go home in the evening. Something we were really proud about. We've heard the word multimodal here a number of times as well. Chariot just becomes another option for city dwellers to actually get around town a lot more efficiently and hopefully keep their car in their garage till Saturday and Sunday. And finally, we are not only we're actually feeding the mass transit services. We're really proud to say that 1 in 5 Chariot riders is actually using the service as a first and last mile commute to things like BART and Caltrain, the ferry system, and Transbay bus terminals. Whereas people were driving to Palo Alto or Berkeley, now they're taking Chariot to Caltrain, jumping on the baby bullet and getting to work without having to take their car out of their garage.
Well, that's an important point. I think one of the things that we're seeing now is all the pieces coming into place. Like you mentioned, it's not just one mode of transportation, it's many. And I'm glad you mentioned the underserved, because my group worked closely with Secretary Fox and the DOT for the Smart City Challenge. And one thing that I took away from it is that I think it's 28% of income for low-income families goes to transportation, as opposed to 17% for middle-class families, and this is around the globe.
Yeah.
So Jim, I wanted you to talk a bit about, what role do you see shuttles playing globally? Because I know Mark mentioned this is not just the U.S. that Ford's looking at, but a global solution.
Yeah, and I invite Allie to help me with this answer, but the opportunity here is the inevitable growth of population in cities. For example, in China, by 2030, 75% of its population will be in cities. Some of these cities haven't even been built yet. And so we're going to need a system solution that's well designed, just like we're talking about here in San Francisco, to handle that population in these dense cities. And what happens is we find all over the world, the issues are the same in these systems. Probably the way electrical grids and computer networks are the same all over the world. Transportation networks are really hungry for the same kind of design.
Yeah, I agree, Jim. One of my inspirations for founding Chariot was when I was traveling around the world, I would see Chariot-type services in Mexico City or Buenos Aires. They call them colectivos. In Tel Aviv, Israel, they call them charuts. So we didn't invent the concept. We're just going to use technology and all the resources that we now have and are really proud to partner with Ford and take Chariot to a next level so that we can create the perfect urban commute.
Now, to wrap up, Jim, and I'd like to hear from all of the panelists as final thoughts, as we think about the cities of the future, how can companies like Ford, Motivate, and Chariot continue to work with cities on mobility solutions? And I'm really curious to hear how the new Ford City Solutions will work as well.
Well, and I want to answer that, Doug, but first I want to pay some homage to Jay, because Jay's history, if you look up his background, he's been involved in design and managing big urban systems in China, for example. And when he talked to me about the role that the bike played in, this model of the future, it wasn't long for me to understand how important this was, as you heard the mayors celebrating the role that it's going to play. And then we have the notion, just told me that they hit 61,000 riders in New York one day this week. So it tells you that there's really an important demand here that is for us to unleash together. And as we think about this in the future, remember that we're going to now have data that helps us see the invisible routes that we tell each other. Hey, how did you go from here to there? We're actually going to know what those are in ways that we can make the transportation system together.
I would add on a couple things, and thank you very much for the comments, Jim. I think one of the things that we're seeing is that cities are evolving incredibly quickly. The pace of change in city, the way in which people want to be using areas, the patterns of movement, actually outstrip our ability to be able to respond with just traditional transportation models to be able to do that. The 20th century, if you think about it, was a century in which cities were shaped by infrastructure, and the development of cities came alongside the infrastructure. The 21st century hasn't been like that at all. We're reshaping cities around us all the time right now. And I think one of the things that's hugely important, and both of these initiatives show this, are things that create a canvas that people can paint themselves, that they can fill this in a way that it fits for them. And ultimately, yes, there may need to be more heavier scale and larger infrastructure investments to be able to do that. But what part of this is showing, I think, is that if you can get this type of system out there, if you can put the technology behind it, people will shape it to what they want it to be.
And so, Doug, when you ask me how are the cities feeling about this, we can't get to them fast enough. And in fact, I have to say, and I'm proud of this, is they said there's not very many automotive manufacturers talking to us. So really, Ford is leading the way in thinking about the city as a partner in helping come up with these solutions.
And we're very proud in our home city of San Francisco that we've been very well received from City Hall supervisors in the districts where Chariot is helping their constituents getting to work and home faster, more reliably. And you touched on something, Doug, about affordability. Chariot's average fare is $4. So we're using technology, the crowdsourcing technology, to kind of figure out where the bunches of people are and driving down costs. And this is, with Ford's help, we're going to, and the data and the telematics and all of the systems that we're going to continue to put in place, we're excited to drive that cost down even further.
Well, as Jay mentioned, it's a systematic approach, a system-wide approach, and I think that really is a takeaway here. I mean, here we have someone from an automaker, someone from a dynamic shuttle service, bike sharing, and I think the other thing is what I'm seeing, and this is one of my takeaways from working with the DOT too, is the mayors. We're talking with all the mayors, and we saw 3 of them here today. Mayor Kasim Reed from Atlanta said last year at CES, an event, saying, we want to get elected, and transportation is a huge part of what makes the city livable. I know with Mayor Adler in Austin as well. Yeah. So I think the bottom line is this technology, and Jay, you touched on that, the technology is really going to shape it, and people are going to shape the technology. So I think the takeaway, and we'll end, is that we're going to see all these different solutions coming together. And I do applaud Ford for taking the leap in doing this with smart mobility and bringing these things together. So we'll wrap up there.